So to me, this is folk music is what I do, and when I tell people that, they kind of do a bit of an eye roll and stuff like that because everything is made out of steel, and it has, steel doesn't seem folksy. Folksy is very in our, programmed imaginations. Folksy is very wooden and it's very old-timey and it's very natural and back to the landy and all that kind of stuff. But to me, that's a fantasy. That isn't the real world. Wherever you are, look around and count the number of things you see that are made out of steel around you, and it's just everywhere. And that doesn't matter if you're in an urban landscape. There'll be chain link fences and parking meters and cars and, it's just everywhere. And same if you're on a farm, there's going to be shovels and axes and tractors and, it's just everywhere. It's what makes our species go as a material and has for quite a while now. So for me to be in the 21st century, wood is sort of a garnish on things, and the truth is there's not very much wood left. The old hardwoods, they've been kind of used up. The sustainability of using that it's just not. Steel, on the other hand, that's everywhere. It's all over the place. It's they don't even make new steel anymore. That's why the American steel industry kind of went out of business, is because in the late 50s and early 60s, people in other countries found out they had all this steel around, and you just melt it down and do it again, and melt it down and do it again. Probably this thing has been 10 or 20 other things in its life. Maybe it was once, it's probably a combination of, I don't know, just use your imagination of how many things could have gone into this, because it's the same material. That's for plentiful and crowded species like ourselves, that's the kind of material that we need. Wood is limited. You really only use it, once, maybe twice, and then the next thing is firewood. Sometimes it goes directly to firewood. Steel is not useful as firewood, but if you want to make firewood, it's really a handy thing to have around. If you want to have a saw or an axe or, a split and maul, whatever, it's completely integrated into our lives. And so for me, here in the 21st century, if we're going to make folk music, steel would seem to be an automatic, kind of no-brainer of what we'd have to use to make that. Corollary to that, I think the idea that it's forbidding or futuristic or post-apocalyptic, we've kind of heard these things like, no, it's not. This is the world we live in now. It's made out of steel. It's, this is where we are now, the idea that something folk is completely based on nostalgia kind of offends me in a way. I think nothing is folk if it's not about now. You have now in the trendy, this is the pop hip thing this year, like that. And I don't mean now by that whatever the latest fashion trend is, that's not really what I mean. I mean the reality that we live in now. And the reality that we live in now is you're not just going to wander out and find a piece of wood good enough to make a guitar out of. Someone's going to have to go hunt for that and find it. It's and you're going to pay a lot of money for it too. It's Gibson got in trouble a few years ago for sneaking, endangered hardwoods in and trying to use them to make their guitars. It's, I guess they were smuggling wood that has been put on the endangered list and you're not supposed to use for manufacturing anymore. And back in the day, someone could just, walk out in the forest and cut down a tree that had really beautiful grain to it and make themselves whatever instrument they were making. That isn't true now. But on the other hand, steel is everywhere. There's so much of it, and I think it's expensive because I have to buy it. But in the scheme of things, it's not very expensive. Like the amount of steel in an average instrument costs like $10, 15, whatever. Like if it's a big complicated one, maybe it's like 25. And it's available in all these shapes. It's like it recycles. It takes a lot of heat to recycle. It has to get up to like 3,000 degrees. So it's not green in that sense that it uses a lot of heat. But it is green in the sense of its recyclability, and it's really already here. Like we're not going to probably need more of this. And this was why in the 70s the American steel industry collapsed and hundreds of thousands of people lost their livelihoods. And it was really because the management of the traditional steel businesses, particularly like, Bethlehem and stuff like that, refused to accept that we don't really need this new stuff anymore. We don't have to mine iron and coal. We can just grab what we've already got and heat it up. And we can heat it up with natural gas, or we can heat it up with whatever. We just have to get it to 3,000 degrees, and then we can make whatever we want out of it. Add in certain alloys for different things, and there's a lot of science in that. That's probably not very interesting to anybody that doesn't deal with it on a daily basis, but its flexibility and its use, it's much easier, I can say. Working with steel is far easier than working with wood. It's actually why I was attracted to it in the first place. You do something and it's done. It's not going to change with the weather. And that's why you need good wood to make instruments out of, is because you can't have things that are just going to split and warp and throw everything out of kilter. With steel, that's not true. The main thing, though, is that for me, the main thing is the visual analog of it is that I kind of think that the instruments that we play, if we want music to come from our daily experience, that should sort of reflect the world around us instead of pulling us into this refined world of the past, this sort of nostalgic, I really object to the level of nostalgia in folk music. It's for the people that were revering as folk musicians, that was just what they had. They were dealing with what was in their life and what was around them and using it to make music with. And to me, that's the salient point of folk music. It's not, plenty of times I'd love to be back before there were airplanes and you know, even back to like bows and arrows and stuff like that. That's a very appealing idea, you know. But it can't be the worldview that we have, you know. You know, you end up being like a Luddite, like the Unabomber or something. Like, if you want that world, it's so that folk music can't come from a fantasy. The reason that folk music is good is that it doesn't come from a fantasy. That this is what we got, this is what we're doing, this is who's around, instead of setting up these kind of idealized circumstances and all that. And it's a reason probably why we don't have a very strong, you know, I mean, I think a lot about the Occupy stuff and the, you know, the 99% and all that kind of stuff. And it's frustrating that we don't seem to have an identity. We get pushed around. We can say, yeah, we're the 99%, but no, you know, that doesn't really mean anything. It's, we don't have very much that we share together, and we don't have very much that we participate in together. You know, all going someplace to complain together, that's a good thing too, and I'm fully supportive of that. But if we're only gathering out of negativity, and if we're only gathering out of anger and like that, gee, not so much. You know, how are we gonna build a movement of positivity and strength out of that if all we're talking about is them all the time? What about us all the time? Okay, so if we want to have a folk culture, it has to be about us, and it has to come from our lives. And I don't know how we get to that. And if it doesn't happen, well, we're just going to get pushed around forever, and maybe that's the way of the world, you know. I don't want to be pushed around. I don't feel like I get that pushed around. But I do think, like, we have to stop pretending that our culture and our values are somehow being destroyed by modernism and destroyed by, you know, our inability to cope with the present, you know, which might be called future shock, but we kind of need to embrace where we are now and what we have now and work from that if we're going to be something with actual roots to it. You know, we don't have any roots as long as we're only reacting, you know, to what's being imposed on us. And that's a good thing, you know, like I'm all for complaining about it and everything. It's, but we need more than that, and we need something that's a little deeper and much more integrated in our lives. So, after going the long tangent way around, what I do to me is folk music, because it comes from the same place that other folk musicians of previous times did. Is you take what's at hand and you use the readily available technologies to you and readily available materials and find ways to make sound with them. And I really think that's the essence of empowerment. That's, you know, folk music is really about empowerment. You know, you take oh, some like Delta blues, you know, which I just love Delta blues, and the sounds of that. Well, they had these like, you know, guitars from Sears Roebuck or whatever that were so crappy that you couldn't even like pull the strings down above the 5th fret or whatever. So yeah, I want to make music with this, but I can't play this like a guitar, you know. You know, I can't even get these strings to touch the fretboard anymore because everything's so warped and bent and, you know, like that. So yeah, I can do this with this butter knife or this bottleneck or, you know, whatever hard object I have around. I'll just like play it like that, and instead of tuning it like, you know, you play the traditional guitar, you just tune it to some chord you like and just use that, you know. And, you know, to find that place, you slide it into it, and, you know, and jiggle it a little bit to, you know, so you don't have too specific a pitch, you know, and it has this flexibility, and yeah, that's what you have around, and, you know, and so it makes perfect sense to nowadays. You know, you could get something manufactured in China. You can even buy a piece of glass at Guitar Center to sound like a bottleneck, you know, and that's, I'm not saying don't do that, but I'm saying like that isn't really where this came from. You know, there's no, you know, it took creativity of a certain kind to say, shit, this guitar is a piece of crap and there's no way I'll be able to play anything on it. Oh yeah, if I use this thing, there we go, you know, and saying, oh, well, somebody did that, so now I'll buy some stuff that replicates what that somebody did. That's not really the same thing. That's not gonna actually be folksy, you know. That's consumerist. And you know, the amount of if our folk culture is going to be about being consumerist, okay, cool, then that's it. But if we have any objection to consumerism, and if you don't object to consumerism, I don't have that much to offer you, because consumerism is killing us, and you know, I don't need to repeat all the things about consumerists that make us ridiculous and that are destroying our planet and destroying our sense of ourselves and whatever you want. Like, someone else can do that for you, you know. Yeah, read Naomi Klein, you know, like you know, way more smart and articulate people than I can break that down for you if you don't know this just intuitively already. And so that all these people in folk cultures that we admire, they didn't have access to the things that the fancy folks had, and so they made their own and they did their own, and they said, well, you know, no, we don't have Stradivarius violins, and we don't have Steinway pianos, and we don't have concert halls with perfect acoustics. We just have what we have. But you know what? We're going to make music anyway, and we're going to make music together, and we're going to have fun doing it, and you know, like, yeah, like fuck them and their shit. Like, we can do this. We don't need that to do that. And with consumerism and trying to build a folk culture through consumerism, we lost before we started, in a way, you know.